And here we are. Welcome back to the Redshirt Sophomore Podcast, where we never sit out. I'm your host, Matthew Dawson, and joined today again with me is none other than CD. What's going on?
Nothing much. Excited to talk some football. Got Northwestern, obviously, Pat Fitzgerald, potential candidates. Talk about the interim coach a little bit. We're right in the heart of June, July, which means it's media day time. So we're talking Pac-12 today. We're talking Big 12 today. We're talking SEC media days.
We're finally here. We're finally here. We've been talking about literally we've been counting down the days till media days, right? To get to read what all these coaches are saying, what some of these players, these captains on these teams are saying. A lot of different storylines going on. Interesting stuff to follow. I mean, it's also funny to see some of these media members. I mean, we've had a podcast for a month and a half now, and it feels like some of these media members are just not qualified to be media people. But I digress. But they love college football, so I'm not going to blame them for that. They love college football. I love college football, so we got things in common. But it is pretty funny. So we'll get into some quotes. Of course, we love clickbaity, hot take quotes, that we can just take out of context and drive everyone crazy. So let's get into it. Let's talk about Pat Fitzgerald. So we've waited a little bit to open up this can of worms again, right? We were initially there the Monday before, the day before actually news broke out that he was fired. We talked about it on these hazing allegations, and we said if it was found to be true, right, he would be fired. And lo and behold, a day later, he was fired. The interesting thing about that, though, is what information did that Northwestern administration not have that they all of a sudden had a day later or 2 days later when that story broke? What happened? And then my whole thing, Pat Fitzgerald should probably be fired if those things are found to be true, right? Probably should be fired. Well, definitely found to be true, or definitely if they're found to be true, he should be fired. Obviously the question is, did he know things, right? And the investigation said that no, he didn't know any of this stuff was going on. And it just feels like the administration really goofed the bag. And another thing to add too is when they're getting the team together, right, to tell the team that they fired Pat Fitzgerald, the administration, right, the president, AD, they zoomed in from their vacations to tell the team, and Northwestern players reacted and they were pissed, right? I mean, this is kind of a huge slap in the face, right? Especially big transfers like Ben Bryant, AJ Henney. Those are big time transfers that they got, and it's kind of a huge kick to the nuts, that slap to the face. It's like, oh, they don't care about us really at all. And obviously, with what happened with the Northwestern baseball coach, it's a whole nother can of worms. I mean, half that team is in therapy. That is a real stat as a result of this. So it's does this administration, can they be taken seriously right now? My thought is no. So, and it's so weird that Pat Fitzgerald was the only one punished in all of this. Now, well, let's talk about their interim guy that's taking over, right? David Brom's DC that Pat Fitzgerald just hired. Okay. And the importance of this, right, is you can't promote someone in that program that was part of that whole administration with the hazing, right? What's weird is that no one else got fired, right? If Pat Fitzgerald gets fired, but obviously someone's got to take the blame, right? And 9 times out of 10, it's the head coach. So the importance about that is David Braun, he just was hired. He was not a part of the program during all these, when all this hazing was going on. So he's got 0 Division I experience. Does that worry you? What are your thoughts on promoting David Braun instead of going outside and getting someone?
To be honest, I don't think it matters who you bring in as the interim guy. I think this season was going to be tough no matter what for Northwestern. It's more about fixing that culture that's in there. And then also trying to keep together a recruiting class that you signed this past season, and then also that you're signing in 2024. That's a real thing, and trying to keep the roster together, at least some key pieces. Because what this is like, yes, there's only the one-time transfer rule, but you also like they get waivers, and the NCAA hands out waivers like it's communion, on Sunday morning, so anyone can get it, so they'll all get it with their the waivers, and because they got fired in the hazing incident and whatever else. I think it'll be interesting. I think North Dakota State's got a really good culture. Obviously, we've seen that a ton of success. So hopefully he brings that in. And I doubt he becomes the full-time coach. Well, maybe he does, but I think there's some interesting names that we've come up with, we've compiled from other people as well. That'd be really intriguing to be at Northwestern. The problem is they're not in a great spot right now, and it's kind of a tough situation for any coach going in there. So a lot of the top guys probably might not have Northwestern as high on their list as other schools.
Yeah, he's definitely not underqualified. If some people are looking at that and looking at their resume, the D3, D2 resume, and you're like, oh, he's not qualified. Okay, are you serious? Chris Kleiman? I mean, before he walked into Kansas State, I mean, he had 0 Division I football coaching experience, none. He's former head coach at North Dakota State, D coordinator there too, and he walked in and he has done a fantastic job. Obviously, won the Big 12 this last year. So there's no. I mean, Lance Leipold was a Division III guy. You can still be a good football coach and not have a ton of Division I experience. But like you said, the problem is the situation that they're in right now. So
yeah,
what kind of potential replacements are you looking at for Northwestern? Who should they be hiring? Who should they have their eyes out for?
to be honest, they're not gonna have. I mean, we're gonna throw out a bunch of names today that are pretty high level names that are at the top of a lot of coaching searches when they happen this past offseason and the next offseason as well. They're in a weird spot right now because the hiring cycle already went through. So a lot of guys, even though it wasn't a big time new hiring circuit, but a lot of those guys that were looking to change jobs already found their new homes. An interesting guy to think about is Mike Kafka, who's the offensive coordinator for the New York Giants in the NFL. And this gives me a ton of Bill O'Brien vibes when Bill O'Brien went to Penn State. Because I look at this program right now as a total culture reset, probably going to get some kind of scandals and other things where you're going to have to reset that roster. And Bill O'Brien did that at Penn State. He came from the NFL, from New England, a good culture. Mike Kafka is coming under Brian DeBall, who's got New England ties, got Alabama ties. It was obviously a great offensive mind in his own right. So his offensive coordinator would be a really intriguing hire for them. Kind of replicating that Bill O'Brien mold. And he had a lot of success early, and that led them to rebuild that program up, being able to hire James Franklin. And obviously now they're almost a Big Ten contender, playoff contender nowadays. Now, obviously, Northwestern won't have that success right now. But I don't know. That's one that really caught my eye for sure.
Yeah, I don't hate that either. I mean, Kafka. Yeah, I agree with everything you said there. I mean, a guy that I like, of course, Mike Elko. I think if he wants to go get that bag, then he can go do that. But I think he's going to be up for more high-profile jobs after this season. So I think if he just waits his turn, he's going to get his. But also, I mean, I don't know that he's in any rush. But yeah, he's dealt with the academics at Duke. Player retention is the big one, right? Like he did a really good job retaining a lot of players there at Duke. He's just a good coach. We talk about that all the time. He's a good coach. He should be on not just Northwestern's radar, but everyone's radar, I think.
Yeah, he will be absolutely. If they hit the over, on their win total, they overachieve again. They'll definitely be people trying to poach him. I think a guy that would be interesting is also Paul Chris. I know you talked about him. You brought him up earlier when we were talking. To be honest, that seems like a very realistic possibility given Northwestern's current state. I think he's a guy that's an old school guy, but in a good way in terms of, he's got that he's culture guy. You're gonna win from defense and running the ball and special teams, which at a school like Northwestern, you're not gonna have elite talent on the edge, and you're not gonna have elite quarterback talent. So it's not a bad way to win, and then also change that culture like they do need.
Right. A guy that when I thought about it, I was like, maybe that's crazy. Maybe it's not. I looked at Brady Hoke as a potential candidate at Northwestern. He's not making a ton of money there at SDSU right now. Not that that's necessarily what it's about, but I mean, the biggest reason you'd probably take the Northwestern job is um, getting to live in Evanston, right? And would
Beautiful,
yeah,
beautiful part of the country right there in Sheridan Road,
yeah,
right
you
by the
get
lake.
yeah, it'd be fantastic, but also the money is a big deal, right? Big Ten's got quite a bit of money. Pat Fitzgerald actually was making himself quite a bit of money. So, and Brady Hoke has Big Ten experience, coached in Michigan. He's over there at SDSU, and he knows exactly what it's like to work with a poopy administration, as we discussed on a previous episode a little bit ago. They've made their own mistakes recently in the past month or so, SDSU, but um, I thought that was an interesting thought. I think
Yeah, I don't. Brady Hoke I think would fit because we've seen him in the Big Ten for sure. I think he'd be a good hire for Northwestern, but does he want to go from a crappy administration to another crappy administration? I think he's at the point in his career where I don't think he's looking at that. And you want to talk about places to live too. San Diego's
San
not too
Diego,
bad
yeah,
either.
that's not too shabby.
But
So
that'd be a really intriguing hire. Northwestern can pull that off. I'm sure they'd be excited. Um, an interesting guy who maybe was a little bit more highly sought after a couple years ago than he is now, but Matt Campbell at Iowa State, they've totally overachieved in regards to Iowa State standards. Now, maybe you've raised your standards for them, but that's only because of Matt Campbell, what they had success with Brock Purdy and all those guys a couple years ago. If he gets tired and he feels like he's at his ceiling at Iowa State and he wants to shake things up, you want to talk about living. I mean, with all due respect to Ames, Iowa, I don't know how nice that is compared to Evanston. And obviously the paycheck that comes with the Big Ten, and they're building those brand new facilities and all that. Yeah, Matt Campbell would be interesting for sure, but he'll have his pick with other places too if he decides to leave Iowa State.
yeah, and he's had his pick before, and he has elected to not leave. So I don't know. I tend to believe that he'll stay there, but I mean, again, we're just throwing out the chances are with this administration, they're not gonna hire any of these guys that we're talking about. We're
No,
just throwing stuff. We're actually feeding them great candidates right now. They should be listening and actually writing these candidates down and getting ready for interviews next January and February, but or December, I guess. But I don't know. I think these are all good names. Any last one that you want to talk about? Maybe.
well, I want to hear your thoughts. How likely it is that David Braun takes over and stays there? I mean, how many wins do they have to get to? What does it look like for him to keep his interim? Like Brent Key, right? Everyone thought he was going to be replaced by Willie Fritz. No one's given this guy a chance. Like, and they're already throwing out names. So what does he have to do to keep that job there? The over under win total, by the way, is 3.5.
Yeah, I mean, if he makes a bowl game, I think it's a yes. If they have a top 25 win at home, I think, or on the road, I think they could take a shot at him. The thing is though, like Brent Key, right? Like he had ties to Georgia Tech. I mean, he was there through and through. The program loved him, right? They have no idea who this guy is. I mean, this administration is probably just hearing his name for the first time, if I had to guess, because clearly they don't pay attention to their football program until like a bunch of students show up and tell them to. But I don't know. I don't
This
think
was
I'd give
this
it
was
a 5% chance. There's a 1 in 20 chance that he does enough to keep this job next year. And it's not because it's not a discredit to him at all. It is a discredit to this roster that he was handed and this situation he has to deal with and this administration he's dealing with.
No, I know if you get to that level of success, you're a guy that believes in yourself, obviously, and you never want to turn down a challenge. But David Braun was put in a horrible situation because if he produced well at defense coordinator for Northwestern under Pat Fitzgerald, he would have had this was more of a stepping stone like job for him, right? The problem is he's gonna go 1-11 this year, 2-10, maybe 3-9, and he's gonna be brought right back down the ladder as soon as they go and hire a new coach, whether he stays on staff or not. And it's not his fault of his own. The roster's terrible. The locker room's obviously in shambles. The coaching staff, I mean, you got to scramble to find a new defense coordinator and all that. If you ask me, the administration, all they did to pick David Braun was, okay, who's the highest ranking member on the coaching staff that's been there the least amount of time? And that was David Braun, obviously. So like, I don't know. I'm rooting for him because I feel bad for him, and he seems like a good guy, and he's got a tough job ahead. But I don't know. I Northwestern's going to be a team that I'm not going to rush to watch the television for this season.
Northwestern fans, you're not getting Brian Hartline. That is all I'm going to say. All right, let's move on to the Big 12, Big 12, Pac-12, SEC media days. Let's talk about them. Definitely a lot of interesting storylines out there. First thing I want to bring up, Pac-12, specifically, media rights.
That's on everybody's mind. Nobody cares about the conference right now. Every one of those schools, every one of those fans, those coaching staffs, recruits on the West Coast, all they care about is conference expansion and your media rights deal in the Pac-12. Nobody cares about, who's picked to win first and like your preseason award favorites and like all these great quarterbacks are in and these like sneaky good teams that are in the conference. No, it's media rights and it's conference expansion.
Yeah, Commish Georgie K, and he's been pretty adamant this whole time about being patient with the Pac-12 media deal, right? Like even when the Big 12 was pushing it, right? In the Big 12, they were like, "Oh, our advantage is if we get out in front, we can get the deal that we want ahead of the Pac-12." Once again, Commish says, in the end, we are on track to announce our deals at about the same time everyone else would have predicted before conference realignment, and the Pac-12 will be rewarded in the near future. And I don't know. I've heard reports that this media deal is going to be close to the ACC and the Big 12. It's going to be on par, okay? But like, if it ends up being streaming services, how sustainable is that? How viable is that? Right? Like, what kind of actual viewership are you going to get from that? And even if they get paid the same amount of money, I think it hurts. If you have to resort to streaming services, I think that hurts a lot, which is, I think, the advantage of the Big 12 getting out ahead. So I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I don't know. I think we saw the NFL move to that streaming platform with Thursday nights with Amazon Prime. And they still had 13 million viewers that first week with their when it was on the streaming service. And the thing is the more we get and adapt and evolve as a society, most of the younger generation knows how to pull up a streaming service, knows how to illegally stream it or how to sign into their parents' account, to sign into to log in and watch these games. The problem is your older alumni that turn on the cable every Saturday afternoon, Saturday evening, and they can't find their Pac-12 team that they're playing that they want to find. So I think streaming is an interesting choice. I think it'll be kind of brand new for college football at this scale, which could obviously be boom or bust in its own right. I think the Pac-12, I don't think they made a mistake in waiting because, I don't know all these things inside and out, but I'm not going to be impressed with the package. I'll be honest right now. There's no way I'll be impressed with what they get compared to, the Big Ten and SEC, which it's unfair to compare it to them because not only are they a lot smaller brand, but they lost maybe their two biggest brands in their biggest market in the LA market. So it's a shame. Plus they got other rumors of realignments and the future of the Pac-12. So like a lot of cable networks and TV networks, TV execs are not really, confident, I guess, and put a ton of money towards the Pac-12,
Yeah, I think even in your non-optimism, I think you're being too nice. I think this should be criticized. I think fans should criticize it. I think teams should criticize it. Coaches should criticize it. I mean, this is pretty bad. And he's trying to not make something out of nothing. I think he's trying to paint a better picture than it is. And it's just not. I mean, like there's already talks about a lot of his teams moving, and he has said, "quote on on regarding losing schools to the Big 12, quote, it's not a big concern. It's not a concern. Our schools are committed to each other, and this cycle of realignment will come to an end. So will it come to an end? I mean, there's so much smoke for more realignment to come for some of these other Pac-12 teams to either move to the Big Ten again, like USC and UCLA did, or to move to the Big 12 because these media deals, it's on him. It is on him to get this media rights deal and to keep these guys together. And he seems like, oh, it's not our biggest concern, but it should be. I mean, if you're losing schools to the Big 12 and the Big 10, I mean, you're just losing viewership. So I think that's ridiculous. That is ridiculous. But any other thoughts on realignment and media rights?
I want to throw out a name, and this kind of just came to me right now. I have no inside information. I've not really seen a ton on this, but I have seen a lot on teams losing the Pac-12 losing teams to the Big 12 and the Big 10 and whoever else. The problem is I've seen all these maps on Twitter, and I'm sure you guys have seen them too, where it's like realigning the conference based on like a linear thing based on geography or whatever
Linear
these things are.
optimization. Yeah.
Thank you. Yep. And there's a huge gaping map or a huge gaping hole in the map of the United States with the Power 5 teams that is in, that mountain time zone and all like that. I don't even know what you call it. It's like the West, basically the Northwest.
Basically from the Dakotas to Idaho is what you're trying to get at.
Yes. And so I think teams that I was trying to think of teams like Idaho, terrible at football, Montana, FCS. But I think teams that would be a really intriguing ad for the FCS or for the Pac-12 from the FCS would be North Dakota State and South Dakota State. Now, jumping them from FCS to Power 5 is tough. Very, very tough. But they dominate. They dominate the FCS. And you've seen a lot of those players go and have a lot of success in the NFL. So if you want to like make a splash, if you're going to go, brand new and like outside the box with these streaming services, you might as well go outside the box and like throw a Hail Mary to save your conference with North Dakota State and South Dakota State, kind of reach your hand back in the Midwest or almost the Midwest, like the Big 12, the Big 10 did to you, taking UCLA and USC, you grab the Dakotas from them. Not that it's a huge brand, but I don't know. It'd be really cool. I think it'd be awesome.
Yeah, I love the idea of adding NDSU and South Dakota State University as well to FBS. But I think they would take Boise State and San Diego State before they would take those two teams, and then I think the Mountain West would scoop those guys up.
You might have to replace. So you're replacing UCLA and USC. You might have to replace Oregon and Washington, Colorado and Arizona State. There's rumors everybody has a half a foot out the door already. So you're gonna have to add like maybe 4 to 6 teams.
Like if it's DEFCON,
yes.
9 or whatever. I mean, that would be the case. Okay, well, let's get into Big 12. Some interesting stuff that some people said. Neil Brown, is this guy just a snake oil salesman? Does he know he's getting fired after the season, or like is he just trying to like create like some kind of narrative that he like? I don't know. He started his press conference by saying he didn't agree whatsoever with the preseason media pool, which of course his team was finished to pick last because they are the worst team in the Pac or the Big 12.
Terrible.
They are
terrible.
Bad. Do you want to get into this? I mean, I'll let you get into this.
I just think it's hilarious. They had a team meeting about the poll. So the poll came out and they were picked last, and they had a team meeting where they, quote, talked about it in detail. What? You're telling me you're wasting precious time in the offseason to talk about a meeting from the media? You have these countless teams that picked to finish mediocre, last, whatever. I mean, I don't know. I'm not going to pretend to know what a head coach does, for how they should run their football program, but that is hilarious. No matter even if it's helpful or not, that's hilarious. I just feel bad for my boy CJ Donaldson, my running back from the Big 12 that I drafted in our fantasy draft.
Not as good as Devin Neal, but
we'll see. It's cool. His coach is an idiot, so
Yeah,
he'll be there for a
it's
little
just
bit.
weird that instead of like focusing, like it should be like, hey, block out the noise, right? Like now, is this a cliche thing to say? Maybe I don't know. Like the right thing to do is to block out the noise. Tell your team, hey, let's focus on us. What do we need? What do we need to do to be great instead of worrying about what other people are saying? But I don't know. That's the youth league baseball coach in me. But anyways, Iowa State had Matt Campbell was asked quite a bit about the gambling situation that involves Iowa State, which we still do not have a lot of details on. All we know is that um, over there is the potential or likelihood of some suspension of certain players. Could include Hunter Deckers, your quarterback. Again, we don't know a lot. We don't know a lot right now. Um, but Matt Campbell said, quote, that investigation is ongoing, continues to not have a lot of clarity to it. We're getting closer to getting clarity. So if there's some big time players suspended, what does that mean for Matt Campbell? I know we talked about, does that leave him out of the Northwestern job? What does that do to him? Like it depletes his roster a little bit on a team that's, I think, maybe better than people think it is, but also at the same time, not great. They internally promoted their offensive coordinator after they fired their last one because he was so bad. And they're like, oh, let's promote a guy from within that runs the same thing. So I don't know. It feels Iowa State is at a precious they're teetering a little bit on the edge here. I think this situation, if it escalates, it could be pretty detrimental to the future success of this program, I think. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think Iowa State's a program that can't really afford to lose much depth or starters because I don't know how much they have to begin with. But it's interesting because the whole thing is about Iowa in general, and so it's Iowa State and Iowa that I think between the two, like 26 have been suspended, and over 100 are being investigated right now. And the thing is they're very hush hush on who's being investigated and whether the football players or not. We know baseball players have been in trouble, but football players, you don't. There's no clarity yet on the football players. And Iowa and Iowa State play each other in week 2, or I think, which is awesome. Obviously, that's a great rivalry game that they play every year recently. But I hope for their sake, for Iowa State's sake, I hope they're fine. Iowa, I don't really care about. They can, they can spend the whole team if all I care about. But I think it's something that I didn't even know much about until I heard Matt Campbell say that, and now I started looking into it. So I hope it's nothing because all the gambling rules, all the NFL players being suspended, and all this stuff. It's more prevalent. You gotta talk about with your team, make sure everyone's following the rules, and educated.
Yeah, I agree. So Iowa State was predicted by the media to finish 10th in the Big 12. Let's talk about those media polls. Texas obviously is predicted to finish first, which I think is your obvious choice. Whether or not that's the usual, right? People talk that being the usual, right? But this is a good, talented team. Any other surprises? I think UCF at 8. So the order, I'll just say the order before I talk. Texas, Kansas State, Oklahoma, Texas Tech at 4, TCU at 5, Baylor at 6, Oklahoma State at 7, with even a first place vote. UCF at 8, Kansas at 9, Iowa State at 10, BYU 11, Houston 12, Cincinnati 13, West Virginia at 14. I think UCF could be even higher than they are right now. We talk about them all the time. It's a pretty good roster. I don't know. And anything you disagree with? Of course, everyone's gonna everyone has a disagreement with this. People listening to this probably are like, "Well, how was TCU doing at 5 and they made the national championship last year?" I mean, like, sure, everyone has their quarrels with these media polls, but I don't know. Anything that stood out to you?
A minor thing, I think Houston over Cincinnati is kind of interesting. We haven't gotten into our deep dives yet in the Big 12, so we'll obviously talk about it more and give our conference outlook that way. But I think Houston is really bruising, is kind of struggling right now. I don't love their roster. I think Oklahoma State at 7, I guess it's fine. I think as I've learned not to bet against Mike Gundy, but At the same time, I don't know if I love their roster either. The cool thing about it is Texas Tech getting 4 first place votes. That's awesome. I mean, what a job Joey McGuire's done there. They said that they're bringing what 18 starters back from the bowl game last year. That's awesome. And then an interesting quote Dana Holgerson had is he called the Big 12 the deepest conference in the country, which is, I think he's absolutely right. Now, deepest doesn't mean the best because it's obviously not the best, but I think there's a lot of mix up that's going to happen through the conference through October, November, and a lot of intriguing matchups. It's cool. By the way, there's 14 teams in the Big 12 now because of the 4 you're adding, and then the 2 will leave next year, so it'll be back down to 12. But so when Iowa State's picked 10th out of 14th, that's not 10th out of 10 like it would have been last year. But yeah,
Let me ask you: Is Vanderbilt favored against West Virginia on a neutral field?
yeah. Oh yeah, Vanderbilt's favored against Houston, probably. I think Vanderbilt Kansas would be a great game.
Yeah, I just think SEC was probably the deepest this year.
Well, what he means by that is you have like Vanderbilt, but Vanderbilt's a tier below everybody. I think 1 through 14 is the smallest gap. I think that's what he's talking about.
So it's most competitive conference, is what you're saying.
Yes, that's okay. That's a better way to word that for sure.
Okay, because I'm looking at it. I don't think this is the deepest conference. I don't think it's even close. I think last year is deeper than it will be this year for sure. But I don't know. That's just me. And again, last year I didn't think this was going to be deep conference, and it was. So I'm wrong about those things sometimes. Let's talk about the SEC media polls then. Speaking of Vanderbilt, Vanderbilt was projected to finish last, although they got like 5 first place votes. I don't understand that. I think probably a joke. Probably a joke. Sabotage. So in the West, it's predicted Alabama was predicted to win. Close behind is LSU. And Texas A&M at 3, Ole Miss at 4, Arkansas 5, Auburn 6, Mississippi State at 7. In the East, Georgia was predicted 1, Tennessee 2, South Carolina 3, Kentucky 4, Florida 5, Missouri 6, and Vanderbilt 7. I'll speak my part first as an SEC guy. Either of these divisions, I get, okay, Georgia at the top and Vanderbilt at the bottom of the East. Okay, awesome, great. Maybe even Tennessee at 2 in the East, I can understand. But everything else about this conference, it feels like there's no way you could possibly know how this is going to shake out. That's why I think it's that deep, and I think it's competitive, especially in the West, as it is most every year. In the East, you got a team like Vanderbilt that's, obviously not going to compete with these upper guys. Florida's roster declines a lot. Some people are high on Kentucky, but is their depth on the offensive line still scary? I don't know. Missouri maybe have gotten better. So the East, I don't know, is maybe not as competitive as the West. But in the West, Alabama and LSU, or even if you just look at like the roster on A&M, and if Bobby Petrino
but don't throw A&M in there. Come on, now.
I'm
they
going
are in
to
a tier below Alabama and LSU. They are a tier below.
In terms of talent?
No, in terms of.
That's what I'm saying. If their coaching staff hits, this team is talented enough to win. There are 6 teams, okay? There are 6 teams in the country that have a super blue chip ratio high enough to win the national championship based on the results of the last 10 years, okay? Of course, before that, Auburn kind of broke that streak, but
that was Cam Newton, though. That was Cam Newton.
That was different. A&M, USC, LSU, Alabama, Georgia. And maybe I'm missing one. But that's it. That's it. That team's talented enough to win the West. They get Alabama at home. They get Auburn at home. They get Mississippi State at home. The tough games, of course, are LSU on the road and Ole Miss on the road. Alabama right now is currently only favored by 10 against Texas A&M. And that could change if that quarterback situation goes in the dumpster as the season goes on. My pick right now, I would have LSU at the top of the West. In fact, I do have a future on them to win the national championship. And then that's why I think A&M could be in that tier. That's why I'm saying it's hard to predict because like the volatility there is so high. They could finish 7th, but they could also win this whole thing.
Yeah, I think the key word is could be in that tier. I don't put it. You can't put them in right now because of the unknowns. LSU is going to be ultra competitive in the West. They're not going to finish lower than 4th. Alabama, same thing with them. Unless disaster proof. I know A&M disproved that last year again, but I think what's crazy about the SEC West is there is not a single team like Alabama, LSU, A&M, whoever you want to put at the top of the SEC West. There's not a single team that I think is an auto win, especially on the road. I mean, Mississippi State and Auburn and Arkansas are thought of to be at the bottom of the SEC West. I don't feel good going into any of those places as a road team and getting a win, no matter what your roster looks like.
Arkansas is healthy this year.
Yep.
Well, if they stay healthy this year. Auburn entirely revamped their roster, plus they got Hugh Freeze. Mississippi State basically returned almost their entire roster, but they just have a different offensive coordinator, and we just don't know what that's going to look like yet, right? So it's hard to say that. I can understand putting them 7th because you just don't know what it's going to look like, and the loss of Mike Leach is pretty big. And then Ole Miss feels like they have everyone at the bottom of the SEC West's number, except, they struggle against Alabama and LSU. I mean, that's... So,
yeah, the East, though, in my opinion, is it's definitely weaker. I think it's weaker than it was last year. I don't believe in Florida. I don't believe in Vanderbilt in terms of like quality opponents. If you go,
you mean
making
a bowl game?
Win. They'll be probably Florida won't, but maybe like 6-6, like whatever. Like I'm talking about like you get a win there. That's a quality win. Kentucky, I think they're worse than they have been. Even Missouri, I think they're probably trending up. Interesting note about them, by the way. Eli Drinkowitz was asked about hiring a new offensive coordinator. They hired Kirby Moore, and he's going to be calling plays for them now. So Drinkwitz has given up play calling duties, which is probably about time.
Which he did at the end of the season last year, by the way. It is important to note that.
Yes, and so we'll see how Missouri does with a new offensive play caller. But they do lose the wide receiver to Georgia. I'm blanking on his name, but they still have Luther Burden. Anyways, they're meh. I don't know how dangerous they are in the SEC East. It comes down to, honestly, well, Georgia's going to run away with it probably, but South Carolina and Tennessee are kind of wild cards in terms of talent, quarterback talent specifically, and coaches that I think people are pretty high on as well. So we'll see if they can make some noise on a more national level. But the West is fascinating. It's just so fascinating this year.
It's loaded. And the crazy thing is that in the West, there's the quarterback play across the SEC declined significantly from last year, for sure. Which is weird. I thought the SEC had a down year last year. Like that, I don't think it could be up for debate, but I don't think that's a hot take that the SEC had a down year last year. And yet they had elite quarterback talent. I mean, 4 quarterbacks drafted in the first 3 rounds. Plus you had KJ Jefferson in there, Jaden Daniels.
It would have been 4 in the first round if Hooker didn't get hurt too.
Yeah, exactly. Spencer Rattler, right?
Oh, Will Levis dropped. I'm sorry.
But yeah, and obviously the disrespect on me for not mentioning Will Rogers in quarterback rankings in the SEC. But this conference was loaded with quarterbacks last year. This year, I think the conference gets better because of their talent, and I just think even with the quarterback decline overall, it's going to be. But that might be what makes it so crazy competitive too.
Exactly?
No Bryce Young.
Yep. Yeah, you have the gap. I think the bottom half of the SEC or maybe the lower 2/3. It seems like those quarterbacks are getting better. Those offenses are getting better, right? Your A&Ms, Ole Miss with Jackson Dart, KJ Jefferson's healthy. Auburn, anyone's better than last year with Hugh Freeze now. Will Rogers, we'll see with the new offense, but he's another year older, whatever. And so maybe even Spencer Rattler throw into there if he's improving. So it sounds like so that's what's going to make it, more chaotic in the West, I think, because nobody's untouchable,
That's what I'm saying. That's why I think this conference, it's so volatile that I think Alabama could finish 3rd. That could happen. That's a actual possibility, which it has never been considered in past years. In the past 10 years, that's not a consideration. It was never part of the conversation.
Quick note, this is the first year since I believe 2015, which by the way, that year Alabama did win the national championship. First year since 2015 that they were not picked to win the conference. The conference winner was Georgia, of course, but this is the first year that the media picked someone other than Alabama.
And like 2015, they also have a new starting quarterback.
And a quarterback competition, by
yes.
the way.
Yes. So, and an absolutely loaded roster. So, I do think LSU takes in the West. Georgia actually got better this year, which is crazy. And we'll talk more about that in our SEC breakdown, which is crazy because I think Carson Beck might even be an upgrade over Stetson Bennett. But
I was looking at the SEC preseason media, all SEC teams, right? Offense, defense, special teams. And I was thinking like, okay, well, Georgia, how good can their defense really be because of all the talent they lost 2 years ago and then this past offseason too? Like, do I really believe in them, whatever? And then I was like, oh, yeah, they have this guy. Oh, yeah, I forgot about him. Oh, he was a 5-star recruit. Oh, my God. Oh, my. It just kept going. And like, I think every single starter on the team is going to be an SEC guy. Credit to Kirby Smart, because even when Bama was peaking at its best, I don't remember their roster being this good, after like big time championship teams, like dominant teams they've had. So
I'm not saying last year was a rebuilding year, but based on the talent that they have this year and have brought in, it feels like last year was legitimately a rebuilding year, which is
Ohio State blew it. And Bryce Young and Bama blew it by not playing them in the SEC championship because Georgia was beatable last year. They were so beatable. I know TCU had no chance in that game, right? But they were beatable. And this year, if Carson Beck is a player, which we all believe he's going to be, we'll see.
Yeah. Oh, I don't think people in their SEC quarterback rankings have him like 8 or 9, which makes sense because we haven't seen him we have seen him in some action, and he's looked really good. And we also looked great in spring practice. He also looked fantastic in the spring game. He also has better talent at wide receiver. I mean, I don't know. I mean,
when I say people, I mean, your educated folks, like people inside the program, national media guys that we trust, and obviously ourselves that are high on Carson Beck.
Yes, including myself, who literally took him 1-1 in our fantasy quarterback draft, which I don't think is ridiculous.
1-2. I'd KJ Jefferson. By the way.
Yeah. That's right. But I would have taken Carson Beck 1-1. Is that crazy? I think that's crazy to a lot of people.
Yeah.
But Georgia. And here's my reasoning for picking LSU. I think they go on the road to play Bama. Yikes. Here's what I actually think. My prediction is actually what happens is I think LSU can lose to Bama, but still make it to the SEC championship because A&M could beat Alabama. And then I think A&M actually has a good chance of getting murdered on the road at LSU based on that talent that they have at LSU and that environment. And that entire roster, remembering what happened last year, I think that's a really scary game for me. Not excited about that. I am way more excited about the Alabama game than the LSU game. So there's a chance that there's like a 3-way tie there for first. But then again, A&M's going to lose to Ole Miss, so that's actually not happening. So, but I do think like if LSU makes the SEC championship, at that point, the reason why I'm okay with putting quarter unit on them to win the whole thing is that obviously there's no value on taking Georgia, but Georgia up until that point to the SEC championship, aside from Tennessee, they will have been battle tested 0 times. 0 times. And we saw that last year in the Ohio State game, right?
For the first time, a little bit.
They got shell shocked by a team that was really, really talented. And I think this LSU team might be as talented, if not more talented than that Ohio State team last. Yes, I think so. I think it's very possible.
That Ohio State team was loaded. The fact that they lost
defensively
last year, I know we're getting on a tangent.
Defensively, were they? Can you say that they were loaded, more loaded than the LSU defense?
I like their D line. I love their D line
this year. Yeah, I like their D line better this year. Last year, what is Zach Harrison? Oh yeah, because he's really, really good. Yeah, he's not going to be bust in the NFL.
where the hell's Jack Sawyer been? I know we're getting off on a tangent, but that guy's got to play. We'll get into him when we get into Ohio State. But
That's what I'm saying. I think this LSU team could be more talented than last year's Ohio State team. So I'm saying I think the offense is a big drop off, but I think the defense is that much better. But I don't know. All right. Well, we're gonna have a little segment about, maybe some quotes out of context, but maybe we'll say that for an episode next week. How about that? So that's all the time we got for today. Thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you guys like our content on YouTube and Spotify. If you really do, leave us a 5-star rating on Spotify. Hit the subscribe button if you're on YouTube. We really appreciate you guys so much for listening in. We'd love doing this. Get ready for a Big Ten preseason breakdown coming out early next week. Get excited. So thank you guys so much and keep tuning in.